About this. The first thing in understanding the turns, some of the ornamentations, I want the student to understand that anytime you introduce these turns, it should not take away from it, should not alter the underlying rhythm. So if you look in measure 2, it's our first example of the turn figure. What Koprash does at the bottom of the page, he makes reference to Etude number 53. And in Etude number 53, he really writes at the bottom, spells out the rhythmic figure of the turn, which you'll see on this handout. Starting on the G sharp, you'll go up one note in the scale to the A, back down to your starting pitch G sharp, down to F sharp, back up to G sharp, A to B. Now, the way he wants that played is with a triplet figure in the middle, D, da, 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 da. Before the student should really attempt that turn figure, I believe that in all cases of this Etude, they should learn it first with a firm concept of the underlying rhythm and when to move. So if I were approaching this second measure, since the eighth note is getting the pulse through this measure, I'm going to subdivide that. And then once the student knows exactly how that goes, the underlying subdivision, then they can go and add in the turn figure. Now, I want you to look at measure, what is that? The next example of the turn, which, if I had my handout in front of me, I'd be able to direct you a little bit clearer on that. Measure 4. Measure 4 is written differently than measure 2. And so there's some talk about, well, is that a different example of the turn figure? Am I going to approach this in a different way? And I actually sent feelers out to a lot of different professors, some other horn teachers. I actually spoke this morning with a gentleman who actually studied with Philip Farkas, and they know their Koprash Etudes really well. If you were to perform this and play it exactly as you see it in that fourth measure, it would not necessarily incorporate that triplet turn figure. You would have to do one of two things. You would have to start that turn, if you're going to do the 4 30-second notes, you'd have to start sooner and kind of pause on the A longer before you play the next 16th note C, which doesn't feel natural. Or you would have to wait longer on that initial pitch, that A, then go through the run to the C and then up to the E. The problem with that is it doesn't sit well. And the consensus across the board is that just is really, technically it can be done that way, but it starts to sound very rhythmic. It doesn't sound flowing. It doesn't sound like it really fits. And actually the other editions of Koprash that are put out, that turn figure in measure 4 is taken out completely, and they have the same figure written above that they have in measure 2. So it is kind of the consistent that you would approach that the same way. Further down the page, when you get to measure 10, you have another example of the turn figure, but it's on a slightly different rhythm. Here again, I want the student to know exactly how that goes before I add in the ornamentation. So the subdivided figure. You need to be able to hear the C 16th note in its proper alignment. So to really grasp where that is and how to do that, I would, again, have the students play through all the way, learn it without the ornamentations. I would spend a couple weeks maybe, so there's a firm understanding of that before I go back and add in the ornamentations. Later on, in the third line, measure 14, this is a really, this is kind of a trap spot. And I've sat on a lot of audition boards, and I guarantee you that a lot of students after they've played the run up to the B flat and they pause on the F, they're going to cheat that F. They're going to want to continue on into the next line too soon. Make sure, again, with that subdivided pulse, that eighth note getting the pulse, that quarter note F at the top of the space gets 2 full beats before you would continue on in that. Last thing that I wanted to kind of address in this particular etude, measure 8, you have the dotted rhythm that I played also in measure 10. You want to make sure, because some of the inexperienced students will approach that more as a triplet figure than a very strict dotted rhythm that you actually have there. So you will hear more of a kind of a lazy figure as opposed to the D, da da, da da. Okay, so that's another little spot that I would point out and say, pay attention to this. Now, through this etude, like I said, you want the turn figures, you want everything you play as much as possible, even though it is difficult. You want it to make it sound as easy and as fluid as possible. If it gets to the point where you're trying to play and things sound too forced, like the pickup to measure 5, that needs to be big spot, but it's not, at no point in this etude do you ever play with edge. It just needs to be a big full sound. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and go on and address some of the things in the other etude, which is number 50.